Hey, this is Daryl as a service for regarding Office 365, and this is the Office 365 Message Center the week that was July the 31st. I know I had some dates wrong in the thumbnail earlier, but finally got there. And today we're joined by Daniel Glenn. Hey Daniel, how are you doing?
Hello, doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I know that we were joking a little before the show that I was blaming you for the format change. I'm actually really thankful that you suggested it because I think it's working reasonably well this first week.
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll be good to cover, last week, start the week off, and at least for me here in the U.S., it's good to have the Monday afternoon to cover what we saw and what we kind of crept up on us last week from Office 365. So it's good.
Yeah, definitely. And it sort of gets around my challenge too. I mentioned to you that I would be spending my Saturday morning through to sort of mid-Saturday afternoon trying to capture those changes, talk about them, maybe throw them in a post. So this format's going to be good. And, for those of you who are joining us, we are going to try and do it around this time and just talk about the week that was in the Message Center. And now it's actually good to have someone to do that with rather than the monologuing that I often do. So
it's not that anybody got bored with that,
Oh,
We loved hearing you talk to yourself. It was
yeah,
good.
well, I didn't turn it into a podcast because I didn't want people to fall asleep while they were driving. So, self-deprecation, always funny. Anyway, the week that was 31st of July, and we do have quite a bit to cover. I know that initially, or over the few months that I've been doing this, that we've tried to make this a half an hour episode, but we actually just do have a lot to talk about today, don't we, Dan?
Yes, we do. Quite a few items in the Message Center this week, and some things that weren't there. So lots of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was well put. In fact, if I just sneak my notes over there, whoopsie daisy. You don't see those at the moment, but we'll bring that up. So let's just get right into it, I guess, and just to first off to highlight a few pleads or requests. We are so close to getting enough subscribers to our YouTube channel. It's not funny. We need 11 to get across the line to be able to get a decent URL instead of ugsifugadurugabadver. So if you can help us out, that'd be great. Subscribe and also set your reminder to alerts when we go live. So we do have a number of different articles in there this week too. Tracy Vanderschiff is doing a series on Microsoft 365, and she did this great blog series last year. Every day, like one every day for 365. So there, it proves it. There's a lot to talk about.
Yep.
So thanks for that, Tracy, for contributing those. She won't be doing one every day of the week for us, but we'll certainly pick out some ones that are of interest, though they are all of interest. Anyway, on to the Admin Center. Dan, this is the first time you and I have talked about the Message Center and how we work through it. How important do you find the Message Center is in keeping you aware of change?
I think it's very important to keep an eye on it, to know what's coming. And I also, at first, was relying on the summary email getting every week to say, here's what's happened in the last week. But I find sometimes the notifications are either right as something is about to happen or has already happened. So by the time I get that email, I'm behind. So I try to check the Message Center a lot more frequently than just waiting for a weekly email, just to know. And it's really about not only for me to know what's happening, but for me to be able to communicate that to my users in my company, but also my clients to say, hey, this is coming, or did you notice this change? This will affect you, this way. So it's pretty important to keep up with what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And a question around that too. So we have a few ways that we can see the Message Center. What's different ways that you use to read those messages?
I actually use this view. So
You
what
do?
we're looking at now, I mean, I use the portal
Yeah.
and go look at them that way. That's my preferred.
Yeah, and the email, of course. But
Yeah, in the email,
yeah,
right?
yeah. So I've gone into using the admin app occasionally. So I might be making my morning coffee and just sort of flick that on, let it load, and see something new that might have loaded, and just put a mental note. I must have a look at that. As I'm frothing the milk and get on to the next stage. And also just the same app on my iPad too. So there's different places and ways to read these messages.
Yeah, and what would be nice, and if anyone's listening that has any input on this, to be able to take those items from that admin app and be able to say, tick it to give me a reminder I need to take action on this. But
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Because
to be able to say, send me an email or create a flow, from this, to give me some action on it while I'm viewing it.
Oh, now you see, like, this is what happens when a couple of practical idea kind of guys get together. Oh, let's just get that API written so that we can get Flow
Right.
to reach in and do whatever we want with it to automate it.
Well, of course.
Awesome.
Get on that.
Yeah. Oh,
Someone
yeah,
do
right.
that.
Yeah, someone do that. And if you're not watching, hopefully you're watching shortly. Satya, we're talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just go through some of these messages. And I know that you and I we've started to kind of make some notes. And
Yeah.
my usual way was sort of work my way up the list. And there's a lot there. So rather than doing that, we're just going to pick out some of the ones and past comments and jump into them. So what's our first one there, Dan?
We're going to talk about the SharePoint links and announcements list.
Right.
And the new feature that they're bringing to the announcements and links list.
Okay, I think that's coming through right. I might just blow that up a little bit more. How about that? Can I hear that,
that's good.
audience? Awesome. Okay, so 125%, and we're giving 100% now. So, yeah, this was an interesting one. When you read this, what was your first reaction?
So I actually read this on my phone. It was in the email, and I clicked on it to read it, and I read it once, and then I read the post, and then I was a little bit confused, so I read it again on my phone now still, and I just couldn't understand it. And the struggle for me was I've been a SharePoint administrator and architect for, I don't know, a long time, since 2001 version, so first version, and so I know what an announcements list is, but I couldn't figure out what in the world was going on with this. So it because the confusion, I think, for me was we have these SharePoint links and announcements list, and they're going to be updated with the modern experience, but by the way, don't use those for modern pages.
Right.
So, that's kind of the part of, I thought we were getting functionality from the classic experience into the modern so that we could use it in the modern. So, and maybe you could talk a little bit about, the news and the quick links and all that, how that, replaces that. But that was the confusion for me for this one.
I agree. I had to read it a couple of times too. So you mentioned that there was a blog post, and just for those who may be tuning in for the first time, we do like to point out that there's additional information that you can click through to, and this one in particular, let's just see if it doesn't. Yes, it opens up in a new tab. Sometimes it doesn't. That it comes through to our tech community, and that's where you will find blogs of different product groups that will let us know about these sorts of things. So Chris McNulty tells us a little more about it, and I might have to blow this up a bit too. Yes. Boom-bitty boom. Oh, our face is over the top of it. Never mind. Scrolling on up. So it's about modernising the two lists. Yes, you're well familiar with it from 2001. And then it gets into talking about, well, we are doing that, but we don't necessarily want you to use those on the new modern sites, because we've replaced that with two other things that are a better fit. The news articles. So when you create that piece of news, it creates a new page in the SharePoint library, the site library, and then it presents it in that kind of hero web part, doesn't it? And then your quick links, the quick links are the replacement for the links list. So that sort of sits down over on the quick launch. So yeah, a little confusing in terms of, hey, we're modernizing this, but best practices don't use them. Use them in a different way somewhere else.
Yeah, that's I'm smiling because that was really the confusion is we've been asking and I think there's been open communication and willingness from Microsoft to bring those classic web parts over to the modern experience, and that's great. But we get it, and then it's kind of the first bit of advice is don't use it. And that's my commentary. That's not exactly what is said. Chris didn't say that in that post, but that's kind of my thought on it.
Yeah. Well, I'll just see if I can bring just to jog my memory of what we're talking about. So what I got on screen is the new modern news web part, and when you click on Add News, that's creating a new page in that library, and you've got this hero web part that presents those news articles. And then your quick links are really over here, aren't they? So you add links to the quick launch. Is that how you understand it?
Well, no, it's the quick links on the page, but I think the functionality is there to. I think it would be good. It's a good replacement, and it's a little different with news and how that functions with. Versus announcements, so it's a little different, but it's good to understand that you can use it, and I like the news web part. It's actually pretty nice. I like the look of it a lot, but just to say that I think the difference with this announcement is that they're modernizing the list. So if you go into the list view, it's the modern look, but we're not using those on those modern pages like you were just looking at. So
right, yeah. So if I had a quick link, a links list or an announcements list in here, then the lists are available.
How do you have a site with no announcements? I don't. Oh man. I don't know how
this is an Office 365 group site.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there you go. It's not part of the traditional template. Maybe if I went around it another way and did that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's interesting. Well, let's move on to that next announcement. So I think the next one on the list there, I'll go back over to our Admin Center, was apps for Microsoft Teams. Huh? What does that mean?
Yep.
I took an interest in this one because, like I wrote in the article about the various announcements throughout the week, when Yammer gained the Office 365 connected groups, it began, rather than calling the connectors and tabs, so it didn't really have tabs, but the connectors were called apps, and I was asking Angus Florence about that. What's the story? Why is it named differently? And I guess this is why. It's the Teams and I think Office 365 groups, the Outlook experience, are all falling into line and calling them apps. Is it just a name change, Daniel?
Yes. I think the confusion, like you just brought up, is bringing everything in line, calling them apps, is that there's a difference in functionality between the products. So something that is called an app in one space may be a little different than what it is called in another service. It's called an app, but it's just a little different functionality. So whether it's just a name change or not, I think that's the part that people have to pay attention to.
Yeah, I see that they're grouping bots, tabs, and connectors in Teams and calling them apps now. But I think one thing, maybe I can wander my way through to this and find it, but coinciding with this announcement was also that capability to control access to these apps. So being able to switch certain ones on and off. I think, was that a last week announcement? Let's have a look. Updated form apps. Maybe it's part of that same announcement. Oh yeah, allow external apps, enable apps. So if I find my way through to that, to settings, services and add-ins. There'll be something over here. So Microsoft Teams has got a little larger with its settings, I believe. That's right. So tenant-wide settings, and now down in the apps section, allow external apps. And there was something else in here about, yes, turning off cloud storage. I thought there was something in here, maybe I haven't got it yet. There was going to be a setting about what apps I'm going to allow to come in. So one of the discussions that was had in the tech community after this announcement was, hey, that's great. You're giving us the switch to be able to see an announcement, turn it off by default, and then just turn it on when we've managed to evaluate it. But it didn't cover, going forward, it wouldn't have covered something like this cloud storage, because that's not an app. And that, if we sort of go back a few weeks when cloud storage appeared in Office 365 tenants, it was around about the same time that Teams was publicly announced for the EDU, and you could kind of see all these stars aligning and converging about trying to attach external storage and enable schools and various other groups to be able to connect to their external storage and bring it into that Teams environment. That wouldn't have been captured by this new construct of turning an app on or off and evaluating it and turning it on when we need to.
Right. Yeah, and I think another one point that you brought up earlier is just to a good description of that is, and what you're showing here in that additional information link on the announcement. It does have a nice blog post about what is being affected and what's going on there, and that is nice about these communications. Is we don't want to see a blog post, I don't think, in these Message Center announcements. We want to hear an overview, how this affects me. That's great. Enough for me to read on that single page, but then if I do want to read, okay, what is this exactly? I can click that additional information link and get that nice post, and it gives me all the detail and dives in. I really like that.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yep.
So this one,
and for this one especially, it's a good read to understand how the bots are going to interact and how all that works. External access for those systems, for those services that you were mentioning. I think it would be good to include those as well. But
yeah. So yeah, I guess it gets into another topic we're going to talk a little bit further along about changes and planning for that sort of change. Right, so there's one here in our list that's, I guess, not in the Message Center, but it's really, you and I were talking about it just to really highlight that the Message Center is specific to your tenant, your region. So for starters, like when you and I were comparing messages, I've got stuff in here about Intune, and you haven't. And why is that?
Right. That's because I don't have Intune in my tenant that I'm using. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So I've pointed that out in previous shows. I don't sort of dive too much into the Intune side of it and talk about it, but then you and I were comparing things. Shall we swap screens? Have you got your Message Center open to show what you have?
I do. Cool. So let me share my. Go right ahead and do it.
You go ahead and click, and I'll drag over your screen once.
I need I need you to add me as
I need
presenter.
to give you a presenter mode. Yeah. So just for a free lesson for those of you who don't know.
This is how you make someone a presenter in Skype for Business.
Yeah, and I'll also show you how to unmute before you start talking in a meeting. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got control there. Your screen should appear. All right.
Yep, I'm sharing.
There we go. Get rid of our participants screen. Full screen that so everyone can enjoy the movie called Daniel. All right. Yes. So we see your Msg Center.
Okay. So when we were comparing, the one that I had that you didn't is this plan maintenance for Skype for Business. These kind of announcements are very important, I think, to make sure you're reading and noticing what's going on. So for this announcement, there's going to be, it's not a complete outage, but starting the 12th of August, 2 a.m. UTC, to until the 14th of August, 12 UTC, there's going to be some what is called small blips. And I like that term.
Oops, sorry.
So I guess it's small blip because it's less than 2 minutes. So they're doing upgrades for the service, and it is also important to note that these small blips will only happen twice per user throughout the maintenance period. So it won't happen once, twice.
Per user,
So
that's an interesting one. So it's something that's happening at the user level.
yeah, so I think that was an interesting. I don't know if it means that or not. I'm just not sure. Does it mean that this is at the user level, or it's just that users will experience? I don't know.
I think those two are the same, and maybe it's something like the user's been rehomed on a different Skype for Business pool.
Maybe.
It's a bit like when you get that happen with Exchange Online. Sometimes it says, your admin has made a change. Please restart Outlook. It's that kind of, it's a blip. But yeah, it's not that it's going to be an outage between that whole time. It's the blip. Yeah, just a blip.
Small blip.
And I laugh at that. I laugh at that wording because, like when you're getting updates to apps in the App Store from, Android or Apple, sometimes little vendors have competitions about how witty they can be with their wording. So we see a small blip here on Skype for Business, and sometimes I've seen discussions about Yammer outages, and they're very specific, saying that you will have an outage that is this and that, and okay.
Yeah, and it's. I like this announcement. I will say, this is. I would have liked a little bit more advance notice. This was on the 4th, so it does give you about a week's notice, and they're doing it over the weekend. But my first thought was that's great over the weekend, but for people who are in New Zealand or in the East, in China or anywhere else, that's not going to be their weekend, right? That's going to go in. But as we noted, this is in my tenant, exactly. Which is central U.S. So I'm guessing that it is not affecting others. Maybe it is just affecting. So it's nice that, and we've known this for some time, that they can target these messages to the people that need them. So I think as we continue to watch these shows that when you show your Msg Center, it may be different than what other people's tenants, their Msg Center may be. So it's not that they can listen to Daryl and say, oh, these are the things that are important, there's nothing else. It is that you need to be looking at your tenant. Admins need to be keeping track of what's going on in their tenant. And I say admins, and there's even a push now. I've seen quite a few people speaking up, and there's an item in user voice to give users access to the Msg Center. So it's I think just more information to in the hands of the people that, for instance, if I'm not watching this and that Skype for Business announcement is there, then that's great. But if I'm not watching it, I don't tell my users, and maybe they had scheduled some meetings over the weekend or something, and these blips are, those are annoying if you get kicked off of Skype for Business meeting. I don't know if you've had it happen. It never happens to me.
Never. No. Rock solid.
And so anyway, yep. So anyway.
But I guess just as we switch back to controlling that your point about let's just share my desktop. Come on, and no, that's not the desktop we want. This is not the droid that we want. Share that one. Get rid of that. Get out of it full screen, come on.
We love Skype, by the way. Just saying. I like it.
Oh, yeah.
We got this Inception thing going. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is. Trying to turn off the old full screen to get rid of it, but anyway. Restore. Drag you on over here. You are seeing my shared screen? Yes?
I am seeing something.
It'll catch up. Main thing is, our audience seeing the desktop, yes, and the two floating heads of Daniel and Daryl. So with all that distraction, what I wanted to say was, that request for giving users access to the Msg Center in some kind of form, and there's another request kind of along a similar fashion. It'll come to me soon. But we talked about Flow APIs earlier. This is a perfect example of where if admins could then connect Flow to the admin center and in passing as part of that flow send something to the end users about these announcements or drop them into an intranet page. I know what it was. I've seen a few requests and discussion in the tech community about providing templates that you can, they're related to these messages in the Msg Center that you can take and reuse and let your users know about that particular piece of news.
Yeah.
So flow, messages, templates.
One thing that in the chat room, Brian Levinson had mentioned that there is a service communication API. So maybe that's the solution. If someone wants to jump in there and make that happen, I know a lot of people would use it. Yep.
And he's also saying you can't post URLs, but a Bing or Google.
He's saying that you could quickly find it if you just search for Office 365 Service Communication API. You'll be able to find the MSDN documentation on how to do it. So maybe we need to start a pool of some money to pay somebody to get on that.
Yeah, and like there is that pattern we see when a feature's released that sometimes it's only controlled by PowerShell, or there's an API that someone has to write some software for it. Or if it's been a popular request, then there is a UI that has been written at day of release or preview. So, I know there's plenty of opportunity for partners to jump in there and write something.
That's right.
One day it'll be a little easier. But thank you, Brian, and looking forward to talking to you more about the Msg Center and what's possible. Now let's have a look at some other messages. We've got Flow being able to write to SharePoint person's choice and lookup fields. So tell us a bit about that, Dan.
Yeah, and this is something that's not in the Msg Center, but I think is huge for Flow and for using, the successor to SharePoint Designer workflows is Microsoft Flow, and how it can interact with SharePoint is very important. So now, before now, we haven't been able to write to a person field or a choice field or a lookup field, but now we are able to do that in a SharePoint list. So that's great. Being able to use that and write to those columns in SharePoint, I think really helps to expand Flow's capabilities and getting more people using it in more scenarios. But a huge part of that, though, is in the announcement that was made, To me, it was one of the first places where it's listed, yes, we're going to work on this, is at the very bottom it says, we're going to continue investing in SharePoint and Flow connectivity and that story. And here are the things we're working on, and it's going to come. And so one of those is support for managed metadata fields, that taxonomy. So that's awesome. Something we've been wanting for support for document library metadata. So I just mentioned being able to write to these person choice and lookup, but that's for a list and not a document library. So that's huge. Support for document library metadata. Multi-value fields. That's great. Attachments for list. I mean, think about your workflows when you have a document and you want to move it to one to another, being able to put that in a list item, attachment in a list, that would be great. And then publishing workflows. So all those things were added to the bottom of that announcement to, say, here's what is coming. So I think that's a great sign that we're going to get those. And I don't know anything. I don't have any knowledge in this area, but there is a large Microsoft conference coming, and so hopefully we'll get more information about some of this before then. But I'm hoping, because this is huge. I speak on workflow all the time. I work with clients all the time on workflow, and it's just huge to be able to have that those capabilities. And I say full fidelity, really what I used to do and can still do in SharePoint Designer workflows, I need to be able to do in Flow. And this brings it so, a lot closer.
Right, yeah. So I managed to bring that post up. And so relating it back to the Msg Center, it's interesting, isn't it? There are things that appear in the Msg Center that almost feel like it's about keeping you informed and making you aware of new features and capabilities that are coming up. Then there is what we've seen, the maintenance side of things, where, hey, be careful of the blips that are going to happen this weekend. This would be really interesting to hear from, just small blips, more about what the process is or what qualifies as something that should go in the Msg Center. It's right. Like the editor of paper going, right, well, what's going to be on the front page spread and what are we going to have in those next pages? You've only got so much space. It would be
exactly, because there's probably an announcement every day about something in Flow or Power Apps or SharePoint Online, Exchange, Skype, all of Office 365. There's going to be, if not daily, every other day, but what makes it and what doesn't. And are those teams communicating? I don't know. It would be great if there is a process and they are communicating, and maybe when Brian comes on, he can confirm that for us. But how does the team communicate? Hey, we do have this kind of big thing that people have been asking for a lot, and is there a process to get that approved, or should that be put in the Msg Center or not? I don't know. I'm not saying it should be. I don't know. I hope there is a process. I don't know.
So I mean, we've got blogs, and of course the Msg Center's messages actually link off to these blogs. So there could be just a small reference. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear if there is a kind of a like United Messages, United Nations kind of team together that says, yes, we were going to allow that in the Msg Center.
Well, and we're able to filter, so it would be interesting to say maybe everything that the product team deems worthy gets put in the Msg Center, but as an admin, maybe my default view is just for admin type stuff that we see now. But if we want to see others, maybe there's, we can filter out and say, I do want that other content there in a central place rather than having to. You'll know, you brought this up, this article up. It's on the Flows site. This is not in the tech community. Where the other announcements that, when you click for additional information, that's where they show, that's where those are. So there's a little bit of, where do I get information? Well, have you checked the team's blog? Have you checked tech communities? Have you, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, exactly. And around timing of messages, I call this out. I've said this a few times on the show that what I see is messages will appear in the Msg Center about stuff that's coming most of the time before the blog post. Sometimes not, but this is where, okay, do we look at a blog to stay informed and plan ahead when some change is going to occur, or should we be looking somewhere else to get that early awareness? Right. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Right.
Good discussion on that one. Public preview of forms. Where are we? So that's this message, and the reason that you and I wanted to bring this one up is there are things that are repeated in the Msg Center, aren't there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's right. It's they'll make an announcement for something coming up. For instance, the announcement was made for the public preview of the forms service, but it was only on first release. So if in your tenant you have set for first release for your tenant wide, then you would get it. And now though, it's being rolled out globally. So there's another announcement being made to say it's being rolled out, and I kind of like this. I think it's nice that it is stated in the message saying, yes, we did announce this before. It was only first release tenants, but now it's going out globally. I like that, to know that it is going out globally, but also that, hey, haven't I seen this before? Yes, you have, and here's why we're telling you again. I like it to be able to do this. It's just there is this, I think, possibility that you see that in the Msg Center and you don't click on it because you're like, oh, I've seen that before. So I think the only suggestion I would have is maybe calling that out somehow. And I'm going to point out a problem. I'm not going to tell you how to solve it, but somehow call it out to say this is a new or updated statement or something like that. I don't know, but.
Yeah, there is just thinking this through, why would you say it twice? Why would you say it's coming out to first release, so all the first release people are going, oh goody, we get something new to play with and figure out and do, and on the serious side it's also about potentially a limited group of people that are trying things out before they get released to the organization. So this second announcement is you as an admin, it's your early warning that, you know what, you've just been testing for the last few weeks, few months, whatever, while it's been in preview. Now that preview is going to be available to the rest of your organization. So if you need to make any changes, switch things on or off, get some messaging out there to let people know what's going on, and what this new tile is or whatever, then now's your opportunity. So yeah, look out for those duplicate messages. Do read them and just determine, whether like how this affects me is the title or that section there in the message, and that's your real key thing. How does this affect me? What's in it for me? That's what's in it for you.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. What else we got? Oh yeah. So this is one that I'm going to try and demonstrate on screen about the iOS
app. Yeah.
iOS app. So let me try and do this.
Okay, and while you're doing that, I'll talk a little bit about it. We've had communication sites and being rolled out to SharePoint Online. Fantastic capability. Been looking forward for this for a while. And what this announcement is, again, it was not in the Msg Center, but the Microsoft SharePoint iOS app now supports fully accessing communication sites from the app. So being able to deliver those communication sites to your users via the app. So bringing that experience mobile, which is pretty slick.
To get that up on screen now, and I'm also sharing it with you there, Dan, so we can look through together. Now, when the communication sites were released, there was this great cry of joy. Woohoo, they're there, and everyone was doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things to try and get that early. In fact, it almost goes back to our discussion about first release, and there's different kinds of first release. There's a first release for the organization, first release for everyone. And if you've switched yourself over to First Relief for a select group, then you weren't going to get forms, but you were going to get the communication site.
That's right. That happened to me exactly. Yeah. I was on First Release Select User so that I could get the communication site, and then I couldn't get forms. So it can happen.
Yeah. So we figured that out, and that there are differences. Here's the communication site. Managed to get that, and so on the SharePoint app. So the hero web part, or we'll have a look at that page shortly, is reflected here in this little slider, and so we're able to go through and have a look at some of those messages. We've got an embedded video, so I'd thrown this in here. It could be an embedded stream like this one, or here's hoping that something like Skype broadcast can be put in there so that we can do a town hall or something. I know the Yammer team are working on something there on their roadmap that they've managed to share. News articles. So yeah, what I was saying was I didn't do anything to pretty up my communication site. I hear that there are...
I recognize that group in that picture. I've seen them a lot.
No, that's my team. It's my team.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we just modeled for it. So that's the app side of it. And if we go back on over to our page, I think under that tab there. Yes, there we go. And there's our familiar communication site. So our slider of the different hero articles. Thankfully, it's not an auto slider on the app. It's not going.
Yeah.
You get control.
That would be bad.
That.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are arrows on either side of it to let you know. So all good. Yeah. Nice to see that vision that Jeff talked about a couple of years back of having SharePoint in your pocket is spilling over to communication sites and anything else that they release. Lists and libraries. I think there was something else that was recently in there, but it doesn't come to mind. So I think we've got to the end of our list on our OneNote, and if we just have a quick look at anything we haven't really addressed here in the Msg Center. So we've done forms, manage guest access for
groups.
Yeah, that was a good one. So this meaning that you can run a accepted, or what I might say is a block and allow list is what they say, but allow and deny. So you can get more specific about which domains you want to allow your end users to invite as external users. And I equate this a bit to the federated
the Skype for Business. Yep.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. And now, do you run a list like that in your workplace?
Yes, and I think we have these conversations about a lot with sharing, and there's another note in there about OneDrive and SharePoint sharing, but it's about how do we control, and really we're not looking out for people, adding someone who's nefarious from, or some person from our competition or anything, but when you're entering an email address to an invite form or something, oops, you did a 0 instead of an O, and now someone completely different got this email and now they have access. So I think this is important to say, we're going to work with these companies and be able to put those domains in there to say, we're only going to allow these domains to access these groups. Now, there's some companies, and I have some clients that say, you know what, we collaborate a lot with external people, and we need to be able to just do it. And they trust their people, and they have governance set up, and they just say, we'll deal with it if it happens. And I will say it usually doesn't. So it's, I think you have to go with what your organization is used to and is set up with, and who you work with externally, and how all that. So you have that option to be able to say only these domains, that you want to federate to. That's kind of the nomenclature for Skype. So I think it's a good thing to have.
Yeah, I do see a need for an organisation that goes down that line, that they're restricting communication to just partners and key customers. Microsoft does this. You've got to jump through a few hoops to be able to get on their list to communicate directly with them over Skype for Business. And some organisations make this choice because they have a lot of touch points, but they want to be able to make sure that people just can't jump in and say, hey, are you busy or whatever, or not even ask that.
Right, just start talking. Hey, you're online, so therefore you're available. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, you didn't change yourself to do not disturb, so are you busy or are you busy? Yeah. So around the collaboration side of it, it's important to give this option for allow and block lists. Good to see. Yeah, you did say there was a message that we'd skipped over in our OneNote about OneDrive and SharePoint Online sharing experiences.
Yeah, and I noticed that on the site, the page for that you had listed, it showed that you had questioned, does this require the update for the OS to get this? And I think there's some confusion around that as because the OneDrive and the SharePoint experience when you're sharing has changed, and I've seen it, and it's pretty slick, and I love the expiring links, so you can share and have an expiring link, and so say 10 days from now it won't work, and I've used that actually in some classes that I did. So it's nice, but to get that experience on your machine, there's a change that's needed on your machine to be able to have that selective experience sharing, to get that. And that's going to be a great experience to be able to say, I want to sync these files all the time, and then have other files that I just see them as a placeholder, but I only download them when I want to access them.
So that's and I think as I hear it spoken out loud now, instead of just talking it in my own head, as I do sometimes, so there's
as long as you don't answer.
Yeah, that's right. Is it? Well, I do actually. All three of us, we have a good conversation. The sharing experience is one thing, and oh, cat's out of the bag now. Daryl's.
Oh no.
Yeah, no,
we all knew it.
Yeah, of course you did. The sharing experience of clicking and saying, I want to give a guest link, I want to give access to people internally, I want to just give anonymous sort of links. So there's that, and then there's the selective sync, which depends on the Windows 10 fall update. So now that I hear it out loud, that I guess it is two separate things. That the sharing UI is something that's going to be available sooner? I don't know. I mean, the fall update's just around the corner, isn't it?
Well, that depends on what part of the country fall is. It may be. Anyway, sorry. Yes. That's an old joke, I guess. Yes, it's soon. And even if you're on the fast ring, I think you already have it. So it'll be soon.
Cool. So we'll keep an eye out for that, and apparently it's also the same UI across Mac and Windows.
And Finder, that's going to be slick. And when that was announced, several of my Mac friends were like, "Ooh, now this I'm listening now." So I think that's
you mean
that's going to be nice
at the
to
same
see.
time as everybody else? Woohoo!
Right. Woohoo.
Yeah, like, what are you guys complaining about? You're all iPhone users, and Windows Phone is not getting that kind of stuff, so you can't have both, man.
There's too much to talk about today for that.
Yeah, that's right. And so, with that, no, I think we have managed to work our way through the announcements. And, as we're trying to do this new format, there are going to be things that I'm going to leave in bold up the top because they symbol But I mean, okay. So let's just go over what it is. It's a new login screen, but it's unified across a number of different services. Supposedly, there's some other funky stuff that happens in the background, which is kind of where the other comment comes in. But what do you notice about the new sign-in experience?
Well, as far as a user experience, I liked it. I've enjoyed it. But the thing that happened was we get this announcement, and I guess it was the 5th or round about then, 4th, when it happened, and but it was we're doing it, and it's kind of rolling out now. And so it was mentioned, and it was brought up on Twitter that when we were talking about it, that someone mentioned that, and I think it was Philip, that it actually caused some issues for him when he was working with a product, ShareGate, that product and others use. They use your credentials to connect into Office 365, and it broke that process. So ShareGate quickly fixed it on their end. Kudos to them, and I'm sure others have had to do it as well. So it's not just the user experience. It's not just this pretty screen, to get people to put in their credentials. It affects other stuff, and it broke other things. So I think, again, we've said it a couple times already. We have to keep track of what's in this message center and what's coming, but also understand that this may be one of those finding out something's broke after it's already broken kind of deal.
Yeah.
So.
And it was an interesting one because, I just had brought up the screen as you see there. The end users would get a prompt and say, we've got a new experience, do you want to try it out? So they didn't have to, and maybe if they logged in with their regular experience, then there wouldn't have been any clashes with ISVs or third-party cloud applications.
Yeah, I don't know.
But once you choose to try this out, that's where the issue came. So yeah, you're right. We've got to stay vigilant. This show is all about creating awareness of the Message Center and encouraging people to look there. But like this discussion was a social thing. It was a community thing, and so as a nice way to round this off, do hook into the conversations in the tech community. Do have people that you follow and to keep each other up to date, because if anything, and this comes back to a group that I created in the old Yammer network for Office 365 network. It was called Change Alerts, and a bunch of us thought, well, let's join that group because we're seeing stuff before people can talk about it, and it's been released, or oops, it was switched on and now switched off, but the community was keeping each other up to date, and that's really key, is we've got all these sources, let's also keep each other up to date.
Yep. And I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation. I'll be in Seattle this week, so I'm speaking at SharePoint Fest in Seattle, nice. and I'd love to continue this conversation with you there. I hope that there will be people joining us there. I know there's going to be a great crowd, but so at conferences and at user groups and with this show and everything, we just got to keep each other up to date. And unfortunately, that's a decentralized, but we'll work on it. But I know that there are some updates coming to the Message Center. That's was mentioned on Twitter publicly, so I can say that. So I don't know what they are, but I'm hoping that it helps us fix some of these issues we've kind of brought up. But I do like the Message Center, and I don't want us to sit here and say Message Center bad. That's not true.
It's come a long way in the years that I've had 365. Definitely.
Yep. Agree.
Yeah. And there's a lot of effort put in there, and looking forward to talking to Brian perhaps about some of the undercover stuff that they can talk about and help us to make better use of it. But that was the Message Center of the week that was the 31st of July. July, not August, Daryl. Starting off a new post today for messages such as this one at the top. Stay informed about something. Maybe you want to look at that yourself. But let's dismiss those messages, keep this center nice and clear, and leave it all ready for next week. There you go. So thanks, Dan, for jumping on and also, you know, getting us thinking about this new format. I think it was really cool today to bounce ideas off, and really appreciate your depth of experience and observations too.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. I think this is going to be a great resource. I look forward to hopefully being invited back. I wouldn't mind being a regular around here, because I think this is a great topic, and really keeping people informed is I think something that we need to do as people who are in this, just keeping each other informed. So this is great. Enjoy it.
Yeah, well, you know, you've set a high standard for the new format. You know, hey, anyone else who wants to come on? I think Todd Clint was, you know, saying, "Oh, I'd like to jump on too," and a couple of others. There's your standard, man. Yep. You got to be just as good as Dan. You got to be just as informed.
That won't be difficult. Yeah, that won't be difficult.
No, man, it's been good. It's been good. Okay, so that was regarding Office 365, the week that was. Final reminder there too. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Please
follow us on Facebook. We've got our we'll just bring this up here. There we go. We've got our publication page where we're writing little stories. Need another one from you, Daniel. Another one from you.
Okay.
Just a couple of paragraphs. Doesn't have to be anything.
I've got a couple in the can. I've got a couple.
Yeah. Because look, guys, for those of you who are still, you know, listening, our stories are not great big KB articles or massive inspirational reads. Sometimes they're just a couple of paragraphs about what we've seen, what we've heard, what we think. And so it's something that you can relate to regarding Office 365. So yeah, that was the week that was, and we'll tune out. We'll see you again next week around about the same time, and bye for now.